Okay, I want to talk about Purim. A very interesting marker on the calendar in many ways, and I think even more so right now in this year. And maybe a bit unusual, but maybe not. But I would like to begin by giving a word of prophecy, which came to me in 3 words: destiny, door, and departure. 3 times D. Destiny is changing. Our destiny is changing. The door to the season of departure is open, and I think these are very special days that we live in many ways. And unfortunately, most Christians have no idea that last Wednesday, Thursday, it was Purim. Many consider it as a Jewish feast, so it's not for us, or an Israeli type of carnival, but it's a biblical thing. And so it's important for us as well. So Purim is very biblical. We find it, of course, in the book of Esther, and so that's what we look at now. But also, it's somewhere on the calendar, and not on our, or let's say the Western calendar, but the biblical calendar. And again, most Christians have no idea where we are on this calendar. Purim is actually the very last feast on the biblical calendar. It takes place in the month Adar, the 12th month. And in the midst of the month, as most feasts are in the mid of the month, at the full moon. So we had this Purim this week. We had a full moon. It was even a super moon, the biggest one this year. So it's always interesting that if you follow the biblical calendar, and I try to do this always in the back of my mind, you just look up to the sky in the evening and you can see where you are in the beginning of the month or in the midst of the end or the end. Which means that 30 days from now, or 28 by now, it's Pesach. It will be Nisan, and in the midst of Nisan, the 14th, it is Passover, Pesach. So that's where we are. We are at the very end of the biblical year, entering a new year. Purim, I wrote it down here in Hebrew. It is a plural word. The singular is pur. Pur means a lot. It has to do with throwing lots, as we throw dice when people are playing games or gambling. That's what it is. In biblical times they would not use dice, but use sticks and stones or other objects to throw lots. But that is what it's about. So pur is lot, purim is lots. Like many words we know in Hebrew, shamayim, the heavens, it's plural. It ends in im. Or Elohim, it's plural form of God, Godhead. So these words that end in im, Yod, Mem, that is, these are plural words. Why is it called Purim? Because Haman, and I will come to this in a minute, he threw lots to determine the day that the Jews had to be exterminated. And so he didn't know which day would be best, and he threw lots. First lots to find which month, and then which day in that month. And so he came up to the month Adar, the 12th month, the 13th day even. If you read the book of Esther, and I would really recommend that you do so, because it reads like a novel. It's really a beautiful story with a very good plot, and it's romantic in a way. It has a lot, but at the same time, when you read it, you wonder at some point, why is this actually in the Bible? God is not mentioned even once in the whole 10 chapters it is, I think. What is it doing in our Bible? Except that it has to do with the Jews, with the Israelites. But we will see that actually, though God is not mentioned, He is everywhere in the smallest details. He is present. This scroll, the scroll of Esther, holds very beautiful mysteries, and they all point to the hand of God and even to salvation through Jesus. And so it's a very fitting prelude to the spring feasts, which is Pesach, Hag HaMatzos, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then Yom HaBikurim, the Feast of First Fruits. And then, of course, leading up to Shavuot in the month of Shivan. So this is just before all this. It's a story about change of destiny. Change of destiny. So that's why I think that this prophetic word I mentioned is so much tied to this Purim. Destiny changes. And as we will see in the story of Esther, it's the destiny of all changes. When Jesus calls us home, our destiny changes. But our destiny has to have changed before that, otherwise we are not called home to begin with, and we stay behind. Those that are left behind, their destiny changes dramatically also. So it's a change of destiny in many ways, and this is all in this Purim. And there you see also the irony, because Purim, seems that everything is by chance. And nothing is by chance, that's the whole point. It's completely the reverse of what it seems. In this story we see that the destiny of the Jews changes, the destiny of Esther and Mordecai changes, the destiny of Haman changes. Everything changes for all these characters that play a role in this story. And all these changes are dramatic. And yeah, as I said, it seems that all is by chance, but actually nothing is. So first, maybe a short recap of the story of Purim, of Esther. It is at the end of the Babylonian captivity. We know that the Jews were led into captivity for 70 years. And in the beginning it was mainly Daniel who plays in the Bible a role there, who is next to Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king at that point. But then we have this miracle with this writing on the wall, which foretells that this Babylonian empire would come to fall. It's actually what Daniel had already seen in his vision about the statue. This golden head would be followed by the silver torso and arms. And that was the Persian Empire. And indeed, when this writing on the wall appeared, that same night the Persians attacked, and that is when the Persians took over. So after Nebuchadnezzar we had Belshazzar, and then Cyrus. Cyrus was the one who gave the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. And then we had Ahasuerus or Xerxes. And that is the king that is ruling, the Persian king that is ruling in the time of Esther. And he was ruling from the city of Susa. And he was a very proud king, proud of his vast empire, which was indeed very large. And from India to Ethiopia, it was a huge empire. And he was giving a party, a feast, to show off, basically. And at the same time, his wife was also giving a feast for the women. So the men and the women were celebrating separately. And at some point, Ahasuerus calls his wife, and he wants to present her to his friends, just to show off. and she refuses. And because of this, she is deposed, and a new queen has to be found. And this is Hadassah, which we know as Esther, but Hadassah is her Hebrew name. But she's presented as Esther. She is not revealed at first instance as being a Jew. And so she is chosen to replace Vashti. And she was raised by her uncle, Mordecai. Esther did not have parents. And so she enters the palace. And then the second in command under Ahasuerus is Haman. And we see him actually in the story rising in power. And he is a descendant of Agag. And Agag is an Amalekite. We can find in 1 Samuel 15 verse 8. This is where Saul is instructed by God through the prophet Samuel to eradicate all the Amalekites. But he doesn't do this. He kills many of them, but he spares the king and also a lot of the cattle and all this. It says there in 1 Samuel 15 verse 8, and he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. So he spared him, and this would turn against him himself. But we see that even later, even here in this story, we see the consequences of this. Disobedience to God has consequences. When we sin, it has consequences. God can and will forgive sins if we truly repent, but this does not mean that we are rid of the consequences. We often have to deal with them nevertheless. So, anyway, this Haman turns against the Jews, basically because of Mordecai, who is every day sitting in front of the palace, because he wants to keep an eye on how his niece Esther is doing, and so, but he is not bowing down to Haman, and so Haman wants to get rid of Mordecai, but to obfuscate that he is after this one guy, he wants to get rid of all the Jews in the empire. And so he orders a decree, and the decree in Esther 3 verse 12, it says it is written on the month of Nisan, the first month of the year, on the 13th day. So Nisan 13, I put this timeline here, that is when the decree is signed and sealed with the ring of the king, Ahasuerus, that on the 13th of Adar, the last month, the 12th month, the Jews would be killed. This was only through lots that this was thrown, but you see that because of this, he had to wait almost a whole year before he could execute his plan. This was actually for Haman a very bad thing, but this is what he threw lots, and this is what came out. But he had to wait a whole year before he could do what he wanted to do. But it's interesting that this was on the first month, on the 13th of the first month, the decree was sealed, and on the 13th of the last month, it was to be executed. And I will show you that this is not by chance at all. It's 2 times 13 to begin with. That's interesting. Now 13 is 1, 3. I wrote it down here. 13, 13. 1, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. In Hebrew, as in ancient Greek, letters are also numbers. So the number 1 is represented by the Aleph. That's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the third letter is the Gimel. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. This is A, B, C, D, or Alpha, Vita, Gamma, Delta. So the Gimel is the third letter. So if you write 1, 3, 1, 3, you have Agag. You see how it points back to where Haman came from. 13 is also in the Bible the number of rebellion. You can find this in Genesis 14, verse 4, where it says, we served for 12 months, but in the 13th month we rebelled. The rebellion is linked to the number 13, and this will recur later on in the Bible. So it's interesting that all these numbers have also meanings, and this is not numerology, or I've also been accused for being into Kabbalah. It has nothing to do with this. This is simply the beauty of the Hebrew language in which most of our Bible is written. It is God's language, I believe, and so we see a lot of extra meaning and mystery in there, and it's very interesting to see this. It gives so much more depth to these stories. Also, the first month and the 12th month, that's 1 and 12, if you add it, it's again 13. So you see this 13 coming back several times, this rebellion. Now Esther learns about this plot through Mordecai, who just doesn't just sit there, but he is also all ears and eyes, and he finds out a lot of things. So he is obviously being used by God. So he relays this to Esther, and he says, now the time has come to show who you really are. And he says, you can just be still now and do nothing. She's after all the queen. She would be okay, at least for a time. But he says, if you don't speak, someone else will. So, in other words, you've been put there for a purpose. But if you do not live up to that purpose, God will use someone else. God is not stopped by that. So that doesn't make any difference. But this is your destiny. Now you have to reveal that you are a Jew, and now you have to try to prevent this, or at least allow God to prevent it through you. So Esther calls for a fast, and why is she doing this? Because there is a period of 30 days that no one was to approach the king, Ahasuerus. If anyone would, without being specifically called, he would die. This was the decree of the king. And this included Queen Esther as well. So she could not just go to her husband and speak to him. She would die. So she could have said, well, I will wait 30 days. There's time enough. I will wait 30. This is human logic. I will wait 30 days and then I will go and try to be. There's time enough. She didn't do that. She said, I will fast for 3 days, and my servants will do so. And she told Mordecai, tell all the Jews that are in Susa to do the same. 3 days, no drinking and no eating. That is a very serious fasting. That's about the maximum a human being can bear. 3 days without food and drinking. We can do without food a long time, but without drinking about 3 days, then you die. You dehydrate and you die. So this is a very serious fasting that she did. She brought actually herself and all that joined in this fasting to the edge of death. And she said, and then I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish. So she was ready to show what she believed, and she was ready to lay down her life for it. And that changes everything. She was, through God's providence, she had become queen. And we can see the same in our lives, often through providence or what we think luck or chance. We might be blessed with a good job or with good health or whatever, a nice house or you name it. But if we just enjoy it and we don't do anything, we don't show our true colors, we don't stand for what we believe, eventually we will lose it again and we will leave this earth and we will indeed perish. But if we live out our destiny, it was Esther's destiny to do what she was going to do. It was not her destiny to live in a nice palace, to be beautiful, because she was very beautiful. After all, she was chosen from all the empire to be the queen. This was not just for the fun or to enjoy it. So Esther does this fast. Then she approaches the king. She stands in the porch. The king sees her, and that's actually the decisive moment where he could have said, this goes against what I have said, kill her. No, he stretches out his golden scepter and she touches the tip of it, and that is the sign that she's accepted. And it says actually he's pleased to see her. And then she organizes a banquet, actually two, and everything that Haman had plotted will turn upside down. It will be exactly the opposite, and Haman would end up on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. So in short, that's the story of Esther. So, as I said before, God is not mentioned, and it even seems that he's absent. It's all by chance. It's just throwing lots. It's all by chance. That's how it seems. But you see already, there is no coincidence here. Things are not just by chance. It is a reflection of God's providence and intervention. And it is so in the smallest detail. And the result of that is a dramatic change of destiny. The destiny of the Jews is they go from death to life. They would all be killed on Adar 13, but even those that fasted, they were close to death actually from this 3-day fast, including Esther, but they go to life. Haman goes from life to death. And Esther and Mordecai, they are raised up to the highest possible position there, which is very much comparable to what happened to Moses. This baby in a basket that was actually destined to be killed became the second in command next to the Pharaoh. Joseph, who was in prison, became the second in command next to the Pharaoh. And of course Daniel, who was in prison, became also the second next to Nebuchadnezzar. So we see that this pattern, we see it many times in Scripture. God changes the destiny of people dramatically. If we allow him to work in our life, and if we show what we believe, and if we are like Esther, ready to lay down our life, then he can make the same dramatic changes. That is how God works, and that is why this story of Esther is so interesting. It is not just history, it's not just a romantic story, it's not just a story with a nice plot, but this is how God works. And God is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. So it's the same how he works today and how he can work in your life and in my life. There is no difference. But we have to be ready to indeed lay down our lives, to like Esther say, okay, if I perish, I perish, but I will stand for my God, I will stand for what he has purposed for me. And he has purposed something for all of us. In Jeremiah 1, we've quoted it many times, God speaks to Jeremiah, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. God has set a purpose, a destiny for us, even before we are born. We find the same in Psalm 139 and in Job, of course, as well. It is not along the way that God sees, this person is doing well, he has potential for this or that, I will use him. No, he has already purposed it beforehand, but it's up to us whether we want to live up to that. It's up to us whether we obey, because it's all a matter of obedience and nothing else. And as Jesus says in John 15, verse 13, no greater love than to lay down your life for a friend. That means to us to really be ready to give up everything we have for him. He is our friend, Jesus. He says, I call you no longer slaves, but friends. So, that is what it's about. And when God changes your destiny, he does so radically. All these changes here in this story are radical. They are 180 degrees. It's upside down, inside out, however you want to say it, but it's radical. It's not a little bit. It's not that you cannot really recognize, or that you can also ascribe it to something else. No, it's radical. And we can even see it if we zoom into some details, and this was of course one of them, but there are more in this story. If you look at Esther, when Mordecai brings her to the king to be one of the the fair virgins, as it says, to be presented as a possible new queen, he does this with the name Esther, and not with Hadassah, which was her real name. Hadassah means myrtle, or myrtle tree, which is, by the way, also very interesting, but I don't want to go too deep, but that has very interesting links to the tribulation and to supermoons and everything. But okay, so he uses Esther, which is a Persian name. It's actually Ishtar, which means star. It's just a regular word in Persian language. It means star. But Ishtar was the main deity in the Babylonian and Persian culture. Ishtar or Ionana was this goddess. So to name a woman after this goddess was common, and it was typical for Babylonians or Persians, but not for Jews, obviously. So it would really hide the fact that she was a Jew. But her name was Ishtar. And Mordecai is also not a Hebrew name. Actually, I don't know, and I don't think it's anywhere written what his real name was. But Mordecai is also a Persian name, and it means Marduk. Marduk is the main male deity. So Esther and Mordecai is Ishtar and Marduk. It's the two main gods in the Persian and Babylonian culture. These were the names they had, and these gods actually appear to be totally powerless. These were the gods that were driving Haman. Behind it is, of course, Satan, behind these gods. But these appear to be totally powerless. For the Hebrew, for the Jew actually, Esther sounds not like Ishtar, but it has a different meaning in Hebrew. It can have two meanings, or maybe more, but at least two. It can be Ason Tur, so the combination of these two words, Ason Tur, which Ason means evil, and Tur means to spy. So to spy out evil, that's actually what she did. So that is how it would render in Hebrew. Ason Tur, she searches out evil. Or Esther could also be Satar in Hebrew, which means to hide, to conceal, because she was hidden. As a Jew, she was hidden until the moment that it was time to show true colors. And as it is written and quoted so often, when Mordecai says, "It might that you have been raised for this day, for this purpose." And this is something for us. We are hidden in Christ, but at the same time, there are moments, and I think there are many moments that we have to show where we stand. And in this world where everything is becoming more and more black and white, we have to show where we are. And there's no gray zone. And as I was reading from Esther this week, at some point while I was not reading, I had this gentle voice of the Spirit saying, think about the king. Think about the king, what is this? And I thought, oh yeah, the king. We talk about Esther, we talk about Mordecai, about Haman, about everything, but we don't talk about the king. What about the king? Ahasuerus, Xerxes. And then I thought, yes, we don't speak about the king, and that in itself shows something. He is the king. Everything should be about him, and he should be the one who is in charge. And when you read the story of Esther, he's in charge of nothing. You could not be less in charge of things than Ahasuerus in this story. He is actually insignificant. He's just playing a side role, and he is not the king at all. And we see that the real King of Kings behind the scenes is in control. And this is again one of these opposites that you find in the story of Esther, of Purim. The king is also the only one here whose destiny doesn't change. He is a king in the beginning of the story, he is a king in the end of the story. Nothing changes for him actually. Although there was a plot against him to kill him. That's one of the things that Mordecai also foiled. But okay, it didn't happen, and it didn't change anything for him. He was totally not in control. He was just rich, and he was powerful, and he was bragging about it. And the whole story evolves around him without him intervening in it. And for example, when his wife disobeys him, he doesn't take action. It is one of the princes, Memucan, that tells him he should replace her, and because it's a very bad example in the empire. Other women would also rebel against their husbands and become disobedient. It was not his decision. And then later, it are his servants that tell him that he should get another queen, another wife, and that they should present the fair virgins of the empire to him to choose from. Again, it's not him saying this, it's others telling him. It is Mordecai who reveals that there is a plot against Ahasuerus' life. It's not his own people, it's not himself who's behind it, it's against someone else. It's Haman who plots against the Jews. He seals it with a ring of Ahasuerus, but it's not Ahasuerus who comes up with this or is desiring this or anything. He allows it, he's okay with it. And it is Esther who exposes the plot. Again, it's not the king who is doing this. So you see that he is so totally not in control, actually. He is king by name, but he is not king in this story. He's not ruling. So it's very interesting. Why is this so? Because God is in control. That is the point. That is what we need to see. God is in control. And this is so often in our lives, we can't see God. Like in this scroll of Esther, he's not mentioned by name. He's not mentioned even one time. It's also in our lives often. We can't see him. But it doesn't mean he's not working. We just have to look a bit deeper and we have to just trust and obey. God's fingerprint is over this whole story. If you look at the date that Haman comes up with when he throws Lot, it's Adar 13. Now this is just an arbitrary date. You would say, okay, it's as far away from where he was as possible, almost a whole year. And he was throwing lots for which month, so it had to be in the same year. But it's really the last month. And it's the 13th of Adar. It's not a date that had any meaning on the biblical calendar until that time. But this is actually, if you begin to count from Nisan 1, from the beginning of the year, it's the 343rd day in the year. Now you would say, so what? But 343 is 7 times 7 times 7. And we know 7 is the number of God. God works in sevens. From Genesis until Revelation, he works in sevens. And when you repeat a number, this is also a biblical thing. When you repeat a number, especially 3 times, you emphasize it. We know, of course, all know the number 666 is the emphasizing sin. But for example, Jesus' name in Greek, gematria, Jesus, comes out on 888. 9 is the number of the Spirit, 7 is the number of God. So 7 times 7 times 7, 777. God is showing, you are throwing lots, you think it's coincidence, but I decided it would be this day. And this is very beautiful to see. Now, Nisan 13, we read, is the day on which this decree is signed and sealed. Nisan 13 is one day before Pesach. Pesach is on Nisan 14. So there is also, this is also not by chance. It's the 13th day of the year. So there is a 13 before. There is rebellion here. We have seen this number 13 several times. But after Adar 13, there are 17 days left. 17 is the number of victory. We can find that in the story of David and Goliath. I won't go into this now. But all these numbers and the meaning, they are biblical. So it begins with rebellion, but it ends with victory. And so from Adar to Nisan, from Adar 13 to Nisan 14 to Pesach, are 30 days exactly. But as I said, Haman had to wait for the longest time, almost a year, before he could execute his plans. Well, he would never get there, because we can read when the plan was exposed and Haman was actually killed himself. It was already in the 3rd month. On the 23rd of Sivan, we can read here in Esther 8 verse 9, the plot was foiled. And you think, okay, Sivan 23, what is that? It's also an insignificant date, but it is exactly 70 days after the decree was sealed. So again, you have here 7 or 70. So not by chance. This is God is at work. He is showing it in different ways. Now Esther, her name, also points to Pesach, to Passover. And actually in a not positive way, but as in all this story of Esther, everything is upside down. So it turns out well. But Esther, Ishtar, is the goddess that is celebrated every spring in fertility feasts. And that is where we get the name Easter. It was actually the Catholic Church that chose to change Passover to Easter because people were celebrating anyway, and so they could use this, and they have done this with almost everything, all the feasts, and they are pagan feasts. So that's why I don't like to use the word Easter, but rather Passover. Passover is the correct translation, and Easter is actually pointing to this Babylonian goddess. But it's interesting that Esther, her name points to Easter, to Passover. We can make this relation now. Apart from the fact that this was one day before Passover. On Passover, Jesus' blood made death pass over. So because of his precious blood, death passes over us. We are not to die. That is the second death. And praise God for that. But on the same day, and many Christians fail to see this, most understand that on Passover Jesus fulfilled Passover that happened with Exodus, when they put the blood on the doorpost and death passed over that night. It was the same thing, of course. But many fail to see that he fulfilled not only that feast, he also fulfilled Yom Kippur. Because his blood did not only make death pass over, which is grace. We do not get what we deserve, that is death. The wages of sin is death. But the blood also atoned for all sins. And that is not the same as death passing over. That's a different thing, because that means that we receive grace. We receive something that we don't deserve. So the first one, death is what we deserve. We don't get it, but we get atonement, which we don't deserve. So that's grace. It's mercy and grace. Maybe you remember when we studied the tabernacle, in the picture of the tabernacle is clear, the cross is the altar of burnt offering. It's the first item when you enter the sanctuary. Is the altar of burnt offering. That's the cross. That's where the sacrifice happens. That's where the blood is shed. But the blood is taken into pans and brought inside the tabernacle. And on this one day, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, it is sprinkled on the mercy seat, and it atones for the sins. So these are two different things. When someone comes into the sanctuary to bring a sacrifice in the Old Covenant system, he does so because he has sinned. He brings a sacrifice, it is killed, and of course he repents and confesses on the sacrifice, it is killed, and then he walks out again. His sin is paid for. That's what death is taken away from him, because it's now on the animal. But the blood that is on the mercy seat, that is atoning for the sins of the whole nation there. But of course, if we bring this now to Jesus' fulfillment, it is for all sins of all people, of all times. So that's the atonement. So it's these two things. The first item, the altar of burnt offering, and the last item, the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. These two are linked. And we've seen that, actually we brought this Psalm 85 where it says, truth and mercy meet. This is what is brought, and even in the construction, the dimensions of these two vessels, you see that there is a direct link. So that's very interesting. Here in the story of Esther, we see also that death passes over. That is what happens. That was upon the Jews, certain death was decreed by the king. It was a done deal. It passes over, and it happens after a 3-day fast. 3 days that Esther and the Jews in the city of Susan were bringing themselves close to death actually. They were laying down their lives. And on the 3rd day, death was averted. It points to Jesus' work that he would do both on Pesach and on Yom Kippur. And it's interesting that in the Jewish tradition, they don't necessarily speak about Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And Yom means day, Kippur means atonement. As the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant is the Kipporet, the place of atonement, is what it means. And John writes in 1 John that Jesus is our propitiation. He is our mercy seat. So, all is linked. But in the Jewish tradition, they don't speak about Yom Kippur, but about Yom Kippurim. And it's the same ending, that makes it plural. The Day of Atonements. Why is that? Because they believe, obviously, that's the Old Covenant in the personal atonement, when you bring sacrifices. But they also believe that there will be a final redemption. When the Messiah, the Messiah appears, then there will be one final atonement. Which is interesting because I believe that this will actually, Jesus' second coming will be on the Day of Atonement. That fits all the patterns perfectly. But I won't sidetrack there too much. So Yom Kippurim, that is how they refer to the Day of Atonement, the Day of Atonements. And Yom Kippurim, if you write this in Hebrew, Yom, and then you get the Kap, Purim, you can also read it exactly the same letters as Yom Kippurim, which means a day like Purim. So Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. So you see that Purim points to Pesach, death passes over, but it points also to Yom Kippur, to atonement. And if you read in Leviticus what happens on the Day of Atonement, there are 2 goats presented, and one is meant for the Lord to be sacrificed, and one is meant for Azazel to carry the sins and to be sent into the wilderness. What does the priest do to determine which of the 2 is which? They throw lots. Purim. They throw lots to do so, and they do this, by the way, they make wooden lots, 2. One writes for the Lord, and one writes for Azazel, and they go into a box. It's shaken, and they take out one, and that is presented to the people. This one is for the Lord. And that one that writes for the Lord is placed on the head of this goat. The wood goes on the head of the goat, sealing its destiny. It is like the crown of thorns, the wood that came on Jesus' head, that sealed his destiny. And the other that is sent into the wilderness, he gets a red ribbon around the horn, so that everyone that would see this goat running around would know this is the one that is carrying the sins. So when Jesus got this crown of thorns, of course it created wounds and blood began to flow. He had both. He was both actually. He was fulfilling on Pesach, Yom Kippur, and he was both the goat that would carry, or the lamb we rather say, that would carry all the sins of the world, but also the lamb for the Lord that would be slaughtered. and whose blood would be sprinkled on the mercy seat. And that's why we see, of course, that the veil is rent. He goes into the Holy of Holies to sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat. Although, but I will come to this if Lord tarries, and we're still here in a month or so when we talk about Pesach. Although there was no Ark of the Covenant in the temple at that time, it was hidden before the destruction of the first temple, and so there was only an empty place there, which is correct, because he would not go into that Holy of Holies. He would go to heaven to atone for the sins there. And that is where he is, and he mediates for us. And just like the priest would return on the Day of Atonement out of the Holy of Holies, he will return on the Day of Atonement, first to call his bride, and 7 years later to set his foot on the earth and to bring final redemption to the remnant of the Jews. The pattern is really so perfect. It's, you get the goosebumps. So, it points to Pesach, it points to Yom Kippur, it points to Jesus' work that he would do. All that is in this beautiful story of Esther. So Purim should remind us that God wants to change our destiny, and he wants to change it radically. Not a little bit, not maybe, or every now and then, but radically. That is how God works, how he wants to work, depending on us. We have to be ready to lay down our lives like Esther decided to do. Purim should also remind us of Yeshua's sacrifice, the 3 days of fast after which everything changed. And it should also remind us of Jesus' call for his bride. Esther is a bride who is called before the king. Now, Ahasuerus is, as I said, he is in the story almost irrelevant, but there is a picture there in Esther 5, the first few verses. This is after Esther has fasted for 3 days. So think of this, if we are the bride, this means that we are submitting ourselves to the groom, to Yeshua. And we are ready to lay down our lives for him, to give up everything for him, as he gave everything for us. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel. So now she, after 3 days, she comes in her royal garment, just like we are as a bride to present ourselves in our wedding garment. In the Hebrew tradition, this is what would happen. While the groom is preparing the house, the bride is preparing her garment. And so, that's where you see also the link to the Day of Atonement, to the calling, Jesus' calling of his bride. She stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. That's a picture of Jesus sitting on the throne. And there's the bride. And the bride had made herself ready. What does he do? And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. If we do what Esther did, there's more to it. Before this, she has purified herself and all this. But when we present ourselves pure before him, all submitted, we will find favor in his sight. And he will reach out to us. He will call us in. The king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. So there's a beautiful picture here also of Jesus calling us his bride, being pleased when he sees us. So it's all about being ready, preparing ourselves, being ready, submitting ourselves, being obedient, allowing him to indeed work miraculous things in our life. And with that in mind, and the time we live in, because this Purim, the destiny of Israel changed, which has everything to do with all of this, and with the fact that I think we have entered, or will enter, with the beginning of the new year in 2 weeks, into the final stage. This one simple single tweet that President Trump did about recognizing that Golan is sovereign Israel territory has changed the destiny of Israel, in the sense that it will accelerate that which is prophesied, those that will come against Israel. It will accelerate what is prophesied in Isaiah 17, the destruction of Damascus. All these things we will soon see that they will begin to happen. And these are the things that will happen just before we are called home. So we can say with Moses actually, Psalm 90, even so, Lord, come quickly. Or as it is written in Revelation 22, the bride and the Spirit say, come. Amen.